get started so that we can make the most of our time together and that I can get to know a little bit more about your data issues and potholes specifically as well. Zamo, do you want to start by introducing yourself, my lovely co-host?
Yes, sure. Morning, everyone. My name is Zamo from Khulisa. So basically, we work mostly with evaluations, and we're just going to share some of our experiences with you and take you to the data portals and how to navigate, as well as how to avoid any of the potholes along the way. And I'm hoping this is gonna be an interesting discussion. We're gonna try as much as possible to have it as an engagement so that everyone gets a chance to participate and ask questions, comment, and also share your own experiences. So yeah, Tamara is just gonna take us through the short presentation.
Yes, I will. I will try and keep it as short as possible, but firstly, my name is Tamar. It's really nice to virtually meet everyone. And so what we're going to do, we're going to go through the Navigating Data Potholes presentation, which kind of brings us back to the basics. And then we've got a really fun exercise with some data that I'm sure every single person in this room has had to deal with at some point, and hopefully together we can figure out how to maximize the input of that data. And then I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the potholes that you've encountered or the experiences that you have. During the presentation, if you don't mind, please just put any of the questions that you have in the chat. And then at certain different points, I'll ask Zamo to read them out to me because I can't have both screens open. So feel free to ask anything. We'll answer any questions at the end or throughout the presentation. And then once we get to the exercise, it'll be a little bit more engaging, and I would love to hear your opinions. So let's move on. Firstly, what we can say is that M&E is really only as good as the system and the data that you have. So the systems to manage it are equally important, and some of the systems to manage it is you as a person. So data quality really, really matters because it can either prevent us from using data in the way that we intended to or make our analysis incomplete. And then as a result, we actually end up without a clear sense of how the program is doing and which areas we might need to focus more attention on. So this is why we keep pushing going back to basics. These are all the data quality criteria that we're going to discuss. I know that Kelly and Daniel did a great job at actually already touching upon these, but we'll use some more day-to-day examples to explain some of these and why they're so important for your data quality. So when we start with validity, we're looking at making sure that the data is considered correct. Are you actually measuring what you are intending to measure? And so in order to minimize error, you need to minimize recording or interview bias, transcription errors, or sampling errors. I'm so sorry. I think there's someone who might have their mic on. If you don't mind turning it on where possible, where possible. Then reliability is that data is generated based on protocols and procedures. And this is a very fancy way of saying that every person should be able to pick up these procedures and get the same type of data. So it doesn't change according to who uses it or where it is used necessarily. So the data is measured and collected consistently. Will we get the same data when we collect it again? And if not, there could be a problem with the reliability of the data. So a really fun example of both from my lovely colleague Zamo is, let's say that you've got an alarm clock that rings every day at 7, but you set it for 6:30. It's super reliable because it rings every day at 7. Great, thank you, alarm. But it's not really valid because it doesn't ring at the right time. It rings at the wrong time constantly. Now we're talking about integrity. We need to ensure that the data generated is protected from deliberate bias or manipulation, and that the data is truthful. A relatively recent example would actually be Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos, promoting a blood testing device that could accurately diagnose hundreds of conditions with a single drop of blood. And in order to get that done, what she did is she actually authorized deletion of up to 2 out of 6 data points. So she would cherry pick outliers and remove them from the data set because they weren't giving her the results that she really wanted, in order to get the desired results and to have numerous chains of pharmacies actually want to use her blood testing device. So that can have really, really far-reaching consequences, because that could be people with life-threatening diseases that are now using a machine that isn't actually accurately telling them whether or not they are suffering from A, B, or C. So that's a serious problem that needs to be looked into. And then we're talking about precision and accuracy, which is very strongly linked to validity and reliability. So we need to make sure that the data is accurate, it has sufficient detail. And the small example you see here in the corner is that if what we really want to reach is the bullseye, but you see all the arrows kind of in the white area, quite far removed from the bullseye. It's very precise because the arrows are all pointing at the same spot, but it's not that accurate, because what we really want is the bullseye. We didn't want that white ring. And the same thing in the next one is that the accuracy has gotten better because it's closer to the bullseye, but it's less precise now because the arrows are not pointing at the same point. And so what we ultimately really want is precise and accurate data, all arrows pointing and aiming at the bullseye. And then timeliness, we spoke about this a little bit earlier. Apologies if the image is a little bit blurry. What we need to do is we need to make sure that our data is up to date, so as current as possible, and that it's available on time. And so that is twofold. We need to often adhere to certain deadlines, so we can't go past these deadlines and provide data at a later stage. But at the same time, the data that we are collecting or looking at needs to be current. So when we look at the source of books, those can be very in-depth works, but the information is not very current often because it could take over a year to be published. In contrast, when we look at newspapers, they're shorter articles, but they're often very current because they might be published daily or weekly. Now, I'm not here advocating that we all put away books and we never look at books again, quite the opposite. In-depth works can be incredibly important, but you have to keep the timeliness factor in mind. And when looking at newspapers, there could potentially be bias in the newspapers, or they won't have the in-depth information that a book has. So on those situations, you could actually look at a combination of sources, keeping all of these data potholes in mind. Then when we're looking at completeness, there should be no gaps or missing information for data to be truly complete. I mean, we all know that that is very difficult, and it's probably the main thing that we all deal with when we look at data, is that it's just not always complete. But it must also represent the complete list of eligible persons or units and not just a part thereof. So for an example, if today we were only reporting on the community of practice attendees that attended every single session, then you may have all the information of some individuals, but there were more people that attended and that had to drop off, or that were in session A and not in session B. And so therefore there would be information missing. Apologies. I know that this all sounds very logical, and the cool thing is that it is. It's just that we need to often remind ourselves of this, and especially before we actually get into the data collection. So we need to think about all of these things beforehand. So what are the common data potholes that actually affect your data quality? Incomplete and missing data is the biggest one. It's something that we all deal with, but poor data collection methods could also be an issue, which is manual versus digital, for instance. And that's not to say that one is better than the other, but they could be better suited for certain circumstances. If everyone has a smartphone, then great, do a mobile survey or an online thing. But if they don't, then what you've done now essentially is you've excluded those people that cannot answer a digital survey or questionnaire, and therefore manual could actually be a lot better. But when you use manual and you've got multiple people collecting data, you need to then make sure that you get all the data in a complete way and that you don't have multiple people touching it or looking at it. So these are all things to keep in mind. Incorrect data capturing, that is probably something that we've all done by mistake. And that's why it's so important to continue checking your data as well. And it becomes even more difficult when there's incomplete or missing data. You could have problems with the field or data collection stuff. That could be anything from people not showing up to people showing up but giving you the incomplete data back. And especially when you think about manual data collection methods, if they happen to have one piece of paper stuck in their car seat and they didn't realize it was there, those are things that could happen as well. Or poor data collection tools. Are they actually measuring what you're supposed to be measuring? Are you getting the information that you need? Or, which is something that Kelly and Daniel alluded to as well, are you collecting so much data, but only using 20% of it? That's also an issue. And then when you look at data lists, you've often got duplicates, or there could be a mismatch in certain data types. So you have the exact same name, exact same address, but a completely different phone number or a completely date of birth. And that would make you have to double check who is who and what happened here. There could be typos, which means that someone doesn't at first glance necessarily look like it would be a duplicate, but it ends up being that anyway because someone misspelled their name or there was an error in data capturing. And then you've got the exact match profiles. Those are great because if you have those, then you can very easily remove them, whatever data capturing method you use. So even if you've got an Excel list, it's very easy to delete those that are exact match profiles. But what we often don't keep in mind is that sometimes an exact match profile, so someone who literally comes up twice in your survey, has answered these questions twice. And that is also an ethical issue. Why would we want to use up someone's time twice if they've already answered something? Those are things that we also have to consider prior to the data collection and when we actually train our field workers or data collection staff. And then you've got those that are incomplete profiles, which also lead to incomplete or missing data. So what are the consequences? Inaccurate data. And double counting people can leave certain voices unheard, but others heard too many times. And quite frankly, you're simply not reporting exactly what you could or should. Because if you say that, oh, there were, let's take this group, for example, there are 31 participants, but someone in this group has logged onto their mobile phone as well as their laptop, technically they are only one person. So therefore we would have 30 participants. But if I tell someone we had 31 based on what I think I know, because I haven't actually looked at the data correctly, that is an issue because it's simply not the truth. So then, how do we actually improve data quality? We need to spend more time planning what needs to be measured than we would need to cleaning up the data after we collect it. That should be the rule of thumb. So we need to think about the type of data that's required and then the appropriate data collection method. And when we collect basic data, which is what we'll go into in our exercise as well, for instance, contact details or demographic information or address, we need to consider the POPI Act. So one thing that Zhao and I come across a lot when we work with our partner organizations is that they've got a reception desk, and at the reception desk, there's a piece of paper where every visitor needs to write their name, their phone number, their ID, sign. But what people don't keep in mind is that when I, Tamar, come in after Zamo, I have access to all of Zamo's data because it's on that list. And technically, Zamo did not give permission for me to have that data. So that is a POPI Act violation. So those are things that we in all of our organizations need to keep in mind as well. What is the best way for us to collect people's data without them having access to unauthorized data of others? And then we need to integrate technology into data collection. So we could use online surveys or text messages. We've used WhatsApp before, social networking sites like Facebook or Twitter, or any other mobile data collection. Where possible, it's great to integrate that. Where not, then don't. But when you go digital, make sure that you add restrictions in questions. And also, when we go back to the thought of ethics, we need to ensure that we don't ask someone 500 questions, whereas we're only going to be using 5 of those. So keep that in mind too. Then we need to add data verification steps. In some complicated cases, that could mean photographs to actually prove that people are where they say they are with the newspaper of that day, or phone calls to just double check that everyone is interviewing whoever they should be interviewing. And very importantly, pilot your tools and do so more than once. Because during those pilots, you will find out some things that you didn't perhaps realize about the tool or about the questionnaire that you designed, that can actually help your field workers and data collectors as well. And so that gets us to the next point of make sure you train them and take your time to do so. Just because you've got a fantastic tool and a fantastic questionnaire that you want them to use does not mean that they are sort of innately equipped to take that out into the field. Make sure that you practice, that you train them on common potholes, but also let them know what the data is used for. Because this is one of the big complaints that I'm sure maybe you've dealt with as well, is that you've got such keen and eager data collectors, but because they don't know exactly what you're going to be doing with the data, they don't know which aspects are very important. And therefore, if they don't really get someone's ID number, they might think, oh, well, that's not that important, is it? Whereas if that's all that you're reporting on, that's actually really key. So those are things that you would include in that training as well. And then you still, despite your best efforts, you do need to include time for cleaning data, because, you know, human error can be a part of anything. And Kelly spoke about this a little bit earlier as well, but you need to make sure that you have a secure server to store the data collected. The last thing you want is to have all that data roaming around freely, and people having access to information they should not have access to. So how do we avoid potholes? It really comes back to remembering the basics right from the beginning. Zamo, do you have any other examples that you would like to share with the group, or are there any questions that were asked in the chat?
So far, we don't have any questions on the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, otherwise I do have a few examples that I can share with the group.
Awesome.
Especially, I just thought of the restriction point that you just made. That's very important to take note of, because there's always that difference between paper-based and electronic-based questionnaires. It's very challenging with paper-based, because even though you're it's in the questionnaire, but if it's self-administered, it's not everyone that reads the statement that says, if you answered no to this question, then jump to question 25 or something like that. One typical example that we just had recently started with doing is whereby it was a parent questionnaire, and we sent questionnaires home, learners, for parents to complete and back. So one of the questions there was where the parent needs to indicate whether the learner has done any pre-primary schooling, and the parent would tick no. And then the follow-on question is, which school did the child do pre-primary school? And the parent will say, same school as above, or they write the name of school. That is a bit of a challenge, because you've already said no. Now you are answering that question. You were supposed to have jumped to the next question, because that one is not relevant to you. It's a problem when you are now capturing that questionnaire onto the software, because automatically when you click on no, it won't give you an option to answer the next question. However, you are stuck in between which one was the correct answer between those two. Was it a no or a yes? Or was the child never, did the child never go to crèche, or they went to that same school they are doing grade 3 now? So it's just always those, it's always important to look into those things. And of course, sometimes it's not always easy to avoid, but it's just things like that that we see. And another example that I always give Tama, you remember, is with regards to the date. It's very important to make sure that you specify the date format on your questionnaire. For instance, you requesting date of birth, and the person was born on the 12th of June, 2008. Any number in that date can be can fall into anywhere, whether day, date, or year. So it's important to make sure that you provide a column for a day, for a month, as well as a year. And also make sure that for the year, you provide space for 4 numbers so that it's 2008, not just 08.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good example, and I'm sure that everyone's seen that a lot. And we always think, oh, it doesn't really matter, but then your data cleaning exercise becomes even more straining. I'm seeing that Chris asked, oh, sorry. Let's go to the first one. Mantla, I see that you asked, what are the pros and cons of using manual versus digital methods of data collection? I think it depends entirely on who or what you're asking questions to. So the example I used earlier, some people might not have smartphones, so then a mobile survey or an online survey might not work nicely. But if you provide an iPad where people can input their information on, that would then solve that issue, unless you only have a very short amount of time to get information from a lot of people and you would rather do it concurrently. In those cases, manual methods of data collection can be more useful. But both of them have pitfalls in the sense that with digital data collection, if you don't set it up correctly, if you don't set your system up correctly, you won't be able to actually find out who was who and who was responding with what. So if there are any follow-up questions, or if there is missing data and you've got the time to contact them back to validate some of this data, you won't be able to. And manually, you've got the problem that there are loose papers that someone needs to centrally collect and then bring back, and you might have to manually enter the data into a database or a data analysis system. So it depends entirely on the project that you're running, but both have pros and cons. There is no right or wrong. Holly, I'm seeing this. Is it a good idea to try and insert multiple choice questions where possible? So this is also such a good question. In a lot of cases, it is really nice to provide people options because it actually lowers fatigue. So they, you know, if I ask you, name all the skills that you need to become an effective teacher, you'll sit there and think, holy smokes, that's quite a lot. And you might not think of all of them, and maybe you're not in the mood to answer all of them, but it might be much more useful if you had an entire list in front of you of different skills. And I asked you, please select those skills or the top 10 skills that you find most important to be an effective teacher. The difficulty with that is that if you provide multiple choice answers, you might miss out on some answers that you did not include in your multiple choice options. You can always put an other section in there and have people answer that, but it might not be as effective. So again, you would need to sort of weigh out the questions and see what is most important. But overall, multiple choice where possible, it definitely lowers fatigue, and it will highly likely up your response rate. Thank you for the questions.
Yeah. Can I also add there with Tamar, in addition to using multiple choice, also the drop-down options, where it's, for instance, the area, district, school name, and stuff like that. It's it helps also to pre-populate those, the information that you already have, because you'd find sometimes that like two people from the same school, you have different school names because of typo error or anything like that. So it helps to already have that information pre-populated so that it's just easy for the person capturing the data to just click instead of writing.
Absolutely. And actually, when I move on, Chris, you've given such a great answer as well. Digital methods can help fast track the data collection, cleansing, or cleaning, timely and analysis as compared to manual. Definitely true, but that is when you use your digital methods to their fullest potential. If you forget certain steps, or technology can fail, and if there's no internet connectivity, or the tool that you're using does not have an offline feature, so it can't collect data offline, then in certain areas in the world that could actually then provide you with other issues. So technically, that is exactly why it was designed and what it should be doing. And then it's up to us to set those digital methods up in a way that is most conducive for the particular questions. Marita, I see that you're asking teacher assistants to keep data on the reading they do with each child, and that you're using ODK, which is an app linked to Google Sheets. That's brilliant, because that automatically captures and keeps the information for you. So I'm so glad that that's been a really easy to use, and it might be something that others can use in this group as well. Jennifer, I'm seeing cleaning multiple option answers can be problematic for cleaning data if all the answers come out in one column. Absolutely. And so it depends on how you set up your system as well. If they come up in one column, it is definitely difficult to separate them. There are ways to do so in different analysis programs, but it would take someone that actually knows the ins and outs of everything that you do in order to do so. So it's often nicer to be able to provide them with either separate spaces to provide separate answers, or to provide them with some multiple choice. Any apps that you can recommend for data collection, especially for people with basic training and skills? Well, Zamo, this is actually your area of expertise. Would you share some of the tools?
There's actually quite a number of apps out there that are actually user-friendly, and most of them are very easy. Like if you're able to use a smartphone, you're able to operate that. Right now, we're currently using, what is it called? Tangerine and Kobo Toolbox. They're quite easy to use, especially with Kobo Toolbox, because like everything is right there. It directs you where you want to go. You're able to go back and forth, and it also gives you instruction. So I see, Tama is yes, Tangerine and Kobo Toolbox has been working very well for us, depending on also what data we are collecting. I know with some of VET's projects, they use RedCap. Also, it's also very well. And you know, with these apps also, they help you analyze the data. Often you find an option where you can click to analyze data like in real time before you go into the data cleaning and stuff. You're able to see at a glance what your data is looking like.
Absolutely. And let's actually move over to the exercise so that we can look at some of the data issues, the potholes or the pitfalls. So I'm just going to re-share my screen to that. Are there any further questions, Zamo?
I see there's a question here. What are some of the issues you may experience with using these apps? Firstly is training. You need to make sure that you train your data collectors to be able to use these applications properly. And in your training, usually when we do training, we train in the venue, make sure that there's practices and role plays, And also we go out to the field so that the field workers are trained in the actual data collection context, so that when they know actually to deal with the different issues that they will face when data collection time comes. So like for instance, sometimes it happens that there's network issues in the area, the device that you are using is not up to standard, hence it's usually it helps to make sure that your devices are up to standard, and you check them before going, you test them and make sure that they use and they actually are able to function properly. And also, you know, what we don't usually do is to test the tool before going to the field using the actual device that we are going to use. Sometimes you develop on a computer, everything is fine and you think everything is good, and then you get to the field, you find that there's some issues that we are going to face. So it's very good to make sure that you test and make sure your devices are in and everyone is able to use them.
Yeah. And just very quickly, are the apps free or subscription based? You've got options for both. So they're subscription based, where you've got a bit more functionality, but even the free versions of most of these apps are incredibly useful. When we look at this attendance register here, which is something that we might all deal with at some point or another, I just want to see what kind of issues do we see here, and then I'll get to your question just now, Mantla, about the ethics of having your attendance register digitalized. Is there anyone that would want to mention something that jumps out at them straight away?
Yes, I think there's a duplication of surname. And then after duplication of the surname, when you go to the date of birth, you know, where it was explained that you should be very careful with the date of birth. There's also a problem with the date of birth, 4th of February. It does not correlate very well. I think that's what I've picked up. Yes.
Absolutely, and that's great. I mean, it comes up straight away, so that's perfect. Just to let you know, these are fictional people. None of these exist. This is fictional data. So no, there was no consent because this isn't data that actually exists. These are not actual people. I'm seeing here, missing in. Sorry, yes.
Okay, just to add on it, I'm just looking at number. Is it? I think number 13.
Yeah.
Looking at the date of birth again, I can see that you've got the year captured there, but now I'm also having a problem now with the month.
Exactly. Well, this is one of the big issues, is that if you're not 100% sure which one is the month and which one is the day, it could easily mean that this one is fairly, you know, the 25th of December 1995, but this could technically be the 7th of May or the 5th of July, and we wouldn't necessarily know. And we can't check here either because this person is using a fictional passport rather than an ID number, which would also give you some clues about someone's date of birth.
Yes.
So well spotted. I'm seeing data gaps. Thank you, Rumbi. Absolutely. Missing information, inconsistency. The provinces, yes. Thanks, Holly. Some are abbreviated, some are not. And we might think, well, that's not such a big deal, but it really is, because if we now need to provide data on how many people from Mpumalanga were there, we will say 1, 2, that might be it, whereas there are 2 others that we did not count, or that we count as a separate category, which simply doesn't exist. Thank you, Rumbi. Also different formats in different columns, absolutely. I mean, we can clearly see that there are some ones that are duplicates, but also have more information in some of the columns than in others. So would we then need to manually combine this and make sure that, okay, the top row has the most information? You know, do we move to lead to there, or how would that work? Is there anyone that has any comments on, if yes, what grade do you teach? Besides the missing information. So because we didn't actually provide people with options to choose from, they're just going to type it in themselves. So some use teacher with a capital letter, others do it without, others say practitioner. And so we haven't actually given them a way of completing this in a much easier way. Oh, we're just seeing that we've got 10 minutes remaining. And then address. Let me scroll there a little bit. I mean, I can only imagine how many total garages there are in the Western Cape. So this would be very difficult to actually then determine where they do stay. Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Bridget. One person actually says, no, I'm not a teacher. This is fictional Paulina. Says, no, I'm not a teacher, but what is her profession? She's a grade 4 teacher. That speaks against each other. If we were to now report on the number of teachers by the yeses that we've collected in this data, it wouldn't correspond with the grades thereafter, because there would be one more grade than there are actual teachers in that group according to their own yes or no. I mean, the phone numbers, the formatting is also quite difficult. I wouldn't be able to simply copy this and put this into a phone and say, okay, let me call this person, because the formatting is quite off. So if we go back to our digital data management, we are able to set these type of things up in such a way that people can only input their numbers in a specific way so that it's easier for you to actually get a hold of them. And even if you do it manually, if you were to do it manually and then you transfer that information into any data collection tool or any data analysis tool, you can set up parameters as to how that data should go in. So that will help those of you that will do the data capturing as well. If we look here, these two people, again, fictional people, are sharing an email address, yet two different people. Now that obviously can happen because some families just use one email address, but it is something that you would need to double check and to see if you need to actually speak to Dear Linda separately, that you don't accidentally email this, because Moses might then also have access to it. So those are things to keep in mind too. Is there anything else that jumps out at anyone? Are there any examples from your own practice that you see happen a lot when it comes to data potholes? Okay, Kabatongi. Oh, yes, I'm just going to read it out. I've just had the worst experience where my online questionnaire had a lot of open-ended questions. Took me a full month to clean my data. My lesson from this is try to limit open-ended questions. Yikes, that does sound very hectic. However, it's a beautiful thing that you've learned so much from that. And so now you probably have a few more parameters that you can put in, and perhaps some of these open-ended questions actually helped you formulate some more closed-ended questions or multiple choice questions for the next time that you use an online questionnaire. But I really appreciate you sharing your experience. I just want to go back to the previous comment on the ethics of having your attendance register digitalized. So firstly, which is something that was discussed as well, is that you need to make sure that you store your data safely. It needs to be on a safe server. And then you can also limit access. So you can ensure that not everyone in your organization simply has access to people's details, or they can only have access to, let's say if we use this screen as an example, they could only have access to person number 1 to 20, and the fact that they are or are not a teacher, that could be it. So you can limit all of those things in order to ensure that not everyone just has freely access to any of the digital data. So that's definitely what you need to think about. Mantla, gender neutral individuals not accommodated on the spreadsheet. Absolutely. We are simply just saying we're saying gender, male or female, but as you can see, there aren't even options provided beforehand. So what happens is that people will either type in female or F, and we would have to then standardize that into something, but we haven't even given them options for non-binary or any other type of gender identification that we could add. The difficulty with that sometimes is that some of the funders of the projects that you might have to report into don't allow for that. So those are things that you would also then need to consider whether or not you can or cannot include any other categories other than male or female. Sometimes that is funder driven. Yes, thank you, Darlene. The title, phone number versus cell or mobile number, exactly. I mean, in some cases you would get a cell phone number, in some cases it might be a work phone number or a home phone number that's used by multiple people. So it's definitely good to be as specific as possible about what it is that you want to collect. And that goes back to date of birth as well. There are parameters in which you can say that there's a certain format in which you want the data to be completed, especially if you do so digitally. And if you do that, you can actually make sure that if they do it in any other format, that it simply doesn't go through. Do we have any suggestions for reducing the time of input of manual data onto a platform? Well, some of the advice I would give is if you have to use manual data, it would be good to have multiple people that can help you with the data input at a later stage when needed, but also to set the parameters of, let's say, as an example, you're going to be putting your data into Excel manually. Make sure that you have those type of parameters ready, that you've got a way in which you put the date of birth in, the ID number, the phone number, and that you've got a very clear set of parameters so that you don't then create extra issues for yourself, and you need to spend even more time on cleaning the data rather than just simply inputting the data. Zamo, do you have any other advice here?
Yeah, I'm just thinking also it helps to train the data capturers also, so they understand the tools and they understand the relevance of everything, because we often tend to train data collectors but not data capturers. So the capturers end up not understanding the tools and what is what. What I saw with last year, what happened with us is when the data collection had finished and we were having data collectors capturing the data, it became more simple, and they were the ones now assisting the capturers and explaining everything. So it was easy for them, and it was easy also for them to pick up the mistakes that they were doing in the field. So it's important for both capturers and workers to understand the tools, the relevance, as well as the consequences of any errors that can come up out of the capturing or collecting.
Yes, absolutely. And you could see that those who were field workers who turned into thereafter data capturers, they had such a better relationship with the data because they knew how much effort it took to actually collect this data. And now they could see, oh, wait, I was, in the field when I thought, oh, it's not that important to have their ID number. But now I'm seeing that it's missing, and it's actually now making my work a lot more difficult. And so we've actually seen a lot of people grow in their own roles and then eventually get promoted into supervisory roles because they did so well. So it's also a really good way to provide growth within the organization, is to get people to have a better understanding of the data collection as well as the capturing part of your work. We are leaving in 1 minute, guys. Before we do, I just want to say thank you to all of you for all your questions and for your keen participation. And we'll see you back in the main room just now. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. It's been so valuable.